Good. Okay. So, the Gospels. The Gospels are interesting because they all bring us a different take on Jesus right from the very beginning. So you've got Luke and Matthew. They are similar. They both give us bits of the Nativity, different bits of the Nativity, but that's what they give us. Mark isn't really interested in anything Jesus does before he's 30. He just goes straight in with, hello, here's a man, he's Jesus, here's a miracle. And then John, who writes later than the others, he gives us a slightly more theological take on things. John is more interested in the whole divine nature of Jesus and his relationship with God and the Father. And we see Jesus as part of the Trinity. The Word was with God, the Word was God, as we heard earlier. So we get this right from the beginning. Jesus is God. Jesus is with God and is God. And so it's more of a mission statement, if you like. We haven't got the pageantry of the Nativity, but we get this sort of cosmological explanation for the why of the whole thing. Jesus as the light who comes to give light to the whole world so that everyone can become children of God. And this is done in the form of the incarnation, which we have already seen. So the word incarnation means in flesh, literally. The in and carne, incarnation, in flesh. And it indicates that this incarnate one is an embodiment of some quality or other. And John is using it to indicate that Jesus is the embodiment of God. Jesus fully represents what it means to be God, but also in human form. And the Message, I always liked the Message version. It's a bit of a paraphrase, but it's still good. And it says, the Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. I've liked that phrase for a very long time. So our question this morning is, what can we learn from the incarnation? Or, to put it a slightly different way, what would it be like if Jesus was living your life? Hold on to that question. I'm going to come back to it later on. Now, I don't know if you ever stop and think about your life. Right? If you did, let's do it now. What would you score it out of 10? What would you score your life out of 10? Don't tell anyone. This is just a in-your-head exercise. Anything from 0 to 10, what are you going to go with? Think of a number, commit to the number. Most of us have probably not just said 10. There may be things in our life that are not perfect. We're not in perfect health, or we have stress at work, or we have stress because we haven't got work, or there's things that we've missed that we regret, or we've lost people over the years. It's not quite a 10. It's good, maybe. Very difficult to get ourselves a 10. And we might also think, well, the world in which I live is not perfect. I don't live in a perfect world. How can it be a perfect life in an imperfect world? We have all of these conflicts that are ongoing, the ones that we hear about in the news a lot, the ones that have been going so long they're not even reported on anymore. We've got political challenges, we've got poverty and disasters and all this kind of stuff. So how could my life possibly be perfect when all of this is going on? And this is something that Jesus understands. At the time of the incarnation, when Jesus moves into the neighborhood, the world is also far from perfect. You've got the whole of Judea living under Roman occupation. You've got a foreign and mildly psychotic king on a puppet throne. You've got Samaria, which is long lost. Used to be part of the kingdom and now it's gone. Some Jewish people have become collaborators. Others have become terrorists. The world is quite a mess. But Jesus doesn't choose this moment to step into the world because that is the perfect moment. I think it's because the world is anything but perfect. And the really interesting thing is that 33 years later, when Jesus ascends up to heaven and leaves again, the world is basically still just as broken as it was when he turned up. the Romans are still in control of Judea. We've got a different Herod on the throne, but he's still equally dodgy. Samaria, still despised, still not part of the kingdom. Jewish people, still struggling with the everyday life challenges. He's not fixed the world. But then, of course, Jesus didn't really come to fix the world, not directly. He came to save the people who live there. Now, none of us, evidently, live in first century Judea, because back then there was no mass communication. Obviously, you wouldn't have been here listening to me on a microphone. We don't have that conceptual overlap with Jesus. But there are similarities. Because where Jesus lived was not perfect. Where we live isn't perfect. Our homes, our places of work, our social groups, our families, our relationships, all of them are imperfect. Again, don't get me wrong, some of them might be great. Like, I'm not saying, everyone's marriage is terrible and everything we do is awful and it's not that. You might be going, I love things I do. Great. I'm not saying everything is a disaster, but if we choose to set that really high bar, I'm not sure any of them get to be perfect. There is imperfection. And to an extent, that's why you're needed in those places. An imperfect world full of imperfect people needed and still needs Jesus. In the same way, our imperfect world needs us, even with all of our imperfections. And just as Jesus did, we need to go to broken places to find the broken people who live there and to show them that there is another way. See, unlike Jesus, we are not the way. But we can point to it. We can live it out. So let's think about what that might mean. Firstly, Jesus is present. Now, it's interesting, a moment ago, we heard a prayer that talked about God not being distant. But if you look at the Old Testament, broadly, that is a story of a more distant God. A God who speaks to people through prophets, who lives hidden in the tabernacle or the temple. We very rarely have a present God amongst the people walking around. Garden of Eden might be the only bit where God is actually strolling around. So God is with us. The people in the Old Testament are very clearly the people of God, but he isn't amongst us in the same way. Whereas the New Testament is pretty much defined by the presence of Jesus. When we're describing it in QE, the essential rule for the kids is Jesus in it? If he isn't, it's Old Testament. If he is, it's New Testament. That's what the New Testament is. It's got Jesus in. God suddenly present amongst us. Emmanuel. He is right there. He talks to people in person. He walks with them. He eats with them. He touches them. Jesus is a surprisingly tactile person. He holds people's hands. He touches their eyes, their ears. At one point, he takes hold of someone's tongue, which is a little bit unusual, but there we are. He touches people. He's physically there. When he comes back from being dead, he's like, hey, Thomas, you're not sure I'm alive? Put your fingers in. Come on, let's get real. He is very tactile. He's also geographically present. He's there in Judea. He's walking around in Judea. He goes up to Galilee. Galilee's sort of the dodgy end of the country where it blurs a bit with the Gentiles and where the rough stuff happens. And Jesus goes there. He goes to Samaria, which is like the pariah bit. We don't go, we walk around it. We detour around this country to get other places. Imagine if we did that with, say, Wiltshire. Like we're going cross country, but not in Wiltshire. I would much rather go all the way round and then not touching Wiltshire. Nothing against Wiltshire, just picked it at random. It's a lovely county, I'm sure. But Jesus goes, no, I want to be present there. I'm going to Samaria. I will be in that place. And the same has to be true for us. If we want to show Jesus to the world, we need to be in the world. Our places of work, our families, our communities, our social groups, our schools, our play groups, whatever. We have to be present. You may have come across the term mansplaining. Fascinated to know what this one looks like. Mansplaining. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So it tends nowadays to be a bit of a, someone's just butting into a conversation that they shouldn't. They're mansplaining. But and I'm literally doing it now. As a man, I am explaining to you the concept of mansplaining for all the ladies that don't understand. But just in case anyone doesn't or hasn't come across this, it's the idea that I, as a man, might take time to explain to a lady something about her life that I don't really understand. Yes, you may think you understand pregnancy, women, but actually, let me tell you how it really works. That's mansplaining. And it's used in a very derogatory way because it's basically going, you know nothing about what you're talking about. You have no lived experience of this. You cannot speak into this, and yet there you are doing it. And that's why we need to be present. Because if we speak into things that we are not present in, then we're just mansplaining. Oh, I've got a lovely idea about how your life could be better. Have you lived it? No. Shush then. Be present. Be there. Be part of it. And then suddenly we can speak into that situation and into those people because we're not outsiders, we're living it. We're present. And then secondly, Jesus is different. One of the phrases that kind of follows Jesus around is, who is this? And it's not so much, who is this? Because they generally all know, oh yeah, it's Jesus. He's the Joseph's son, isn't he? He's the carpenter at Nazareth. It's more a question of, who is this? Well, how does he get to do these things? How does he get to say these things? Because he is so different to the established pattern. We often hear that he doesn't teach like the teachers of the time. He doesn't act like the teachers of the time. He doesn't speak like them. He chooses to associate with people that everyone else chooses to ignore. He has little time for the self-important. Interestingly, he manages to simultaneously be a rule breaker, going, yeah, you've got these rules about not healing on a Sabbath. No, that's not really a rule. No one said that. I'm going to heal this man. And then he's also got rules that he sticks to really closely. And he says, you lot are being hypocrites here. You're not following rules that you know you should be. And I think it's fascinating because he goes, what's the point here? Why is this a rule? This isn't a rule. Let's go after God. I'm interested in God, not rules. He manages to annoy everybody in some sense. But people love him and people loathe him. But either way, he stands out. He is different. People don't walk away from Jesus going, oh, that was mildly average. He's different. And so the question then is, how different are you? And more importantly, why? Why are you different? Because Jesus isn't different, I think, for the sake of it. He's not going, what is the single most controversial thing I could possibly do at this point? Let's do that then. That'll shake him up. He's different because he prioritizes God. And that's different to the people around him. He doesn't try to be controversial. He just does what is right, regardless of the consequence. And that makes him different. So again, why are you different? Is it like Jesus? And then finally, Jesus is for, not for, but for, pro, in favor of. So we've just talked about him prioritizing God above all else. In practice, that usually manifests as prioritizing people. Jesus is for the people. The lepers, a Samaritan woman, a Roman centurion, widows, children, servants, a member of the Sanhedrin, a Jewish collaborator, thieves. Jesus is for everyone. Who are you for? Or to think of it another way, who are you against? Are you known for what you oppose more than what you love? Because if our incarnational approach to faith mostly involves telling people what they shouldn't do and why they're wrong for doing it and the terrible consequences they're going to face, that actually might not look very much like Jesus. I mean, Jesus wasn't afraid to speak up. He spoke up against things like injustice. There's the really well-known and rightly so scene where he goes into the temple and he looks around and goes, "What the heck are you doing?" He doesn't use those exact words. But what are you doing? This is meant to be a house of prayer. You've turned it into a den of thieves. And he ushers is far too kind a word. He chases, pursues, and whacks occasionally with a bit of rope some people who shouldn't be doing what they're doing in the temple. He throws them out because it's unjust. But why is it unjust? Because they're blocking the access to the temple for the people. For the people that cannot afford to be buying their things, who just have no longer the space to get in there, their access to God is blocked. And Jesus says, this is not on. And he throws people out. So this is not about being, I shouldn't speak up, I shouldn't be controversial, nothing like that. But it's about saying again, what's the priority here? And Jesus prioritizes people because God prioritizes people. He does this from a place of love. He doesn't go into the temple and clear it because he's annoyed. He is annoyed because these people are not doing the loving thing. And because he loves the people, he needs to act. We know that God isn't the biggest fan of sin. But I like the fact that the best known verse in the Bible, if you only know one verse in the whole Bible, the verse that you're likely to know is that God so loved. God is for. And so is Jesus. And so should we be. So, before we finish, we're going to go back to that question that I mentioned earlier and that I said I'd come back to, and this is me doing it. What would it be like if Jesus was living your life? Because I think that is the heart of what I'm trying to get at here. What would it be like if tomorrow morning Jesus went to your job instead of you? Or what would it be like if today Jesus went back to your house or wherever you're going for lunch to have lunch with whoever you're having lunch with? What would it be like if Jesus took your place at everything you're doing this week? How would it be different? More importantly, why would it be different? Now, the obvious answer and the correct answer is because he's Jesus and I'm not. That's fair. That's okay. But let's go a little bit further. Because I think most people in this room are Christian. And if you're a Christian, you've kind of committed your life to being like Jesus. It's literally what Christian means. Little Christ, one who is like Christ. So if we've committed our lives to being like Jesus, Why would Jesus living our lives be different to us living it? Why is there a gap? Now, I'm not being accusatory here, because none of us manage to be like Jesus truly. The Bible tells us this will be the case. It says we all make mistakes, we all fall short. There's only one who is Jesus, and that's Jesus. But I want to ask another question. What one thing could we change today to live a little bit more like Jesus? This is not a question of salvation. This is not about earning something. This is not about, if I'm a bit more like Jesus, God will love me more, I'll get a better seat in heaven. All of that is sorted. Jesus sorted that. We're not worried about salvation here. What we're saying is, we love Jesus and we desire to live like he did, and we want to do it as closely as we can. So what do we do? If you're not sure, if you're thinking, I don't know, how do I live more like Jesus? Maybe find someone you trust and give them permission to be really blunt with you, and then ask them, where am I not like Jesus in my life? And accept the answer. Or maybe pray about it. Go to God and say, God, you know me better than anyone. Show me the moments where I could have been more Jesus. How could I do that differently next time? Ask yourself, am I present? Am I different? Am I for others? Where we aren't, how can we be? How do we close that gap between how Jesus would live your life and how you are living it? How Jesus would live my life and how I am living it? Jesus came, was incarnate to show us the way. So let's live as incarnationally as we can. And let's keep asking ourselves today and tomorrow and every day, how can my life look more like Jesus? Let's pray. Lord, thank you that you chose to come and live amongst us. That you showed us what it is to live a holy life. Lord, we ask that you would forgive us for those places where we have fallen short of you. And we ask that you would help us each day to see you and to follow you, to come closer to you, to live more like you in our communities and our workplaces and our families. Help us to demonstrate you so that others would see you and would come to know you too. Amen.